try to seize this moment and really hope that the Lebanese people can seize this moment against very difficult odds, because there are still a number of Hezbollah fighters who have access to arms and equipment inside Lebanon, but seize this moment to try to establish actual political stability for Lebanon.
Who do you want to do that?
So look, I'm not. That is ultimately a question for the Lebanese people to answer, not for the United States to answer. But when you see the degradation of Hezbollah inside Lebanon, which has been such a destabilizing force to the country, hopefully, and you can't predict that it's going to happen, but hopefully, that's an opportunity for other political actors in Lebanon to step forward. Yeah.
Matt, I mean, in your answer to Matt, and also during this 12 months, you've been always saying that your main goal in this conflict is not for it to spread to a regional war. And I believe now we are maybe one step further from it, a regional war. But do you think that your way of trying to contain it through your diplomatic means, by drawing boundaries and lines to Israel, that if you cross this will escalate into this war or that war, and the Israeli prime ministers keep crossing those lines, keeps escalating in the region, whether it is in Gaza with the Philadelphia corridor or in Lebanon? First, you advised against major operation in Lebanon. It happened. You advised against ground incursions in Lebanon. It happened. And now we reached to this point. Do you think that he's dragging the United States into a regional war, as he was saying that he wants to do that for a long time now?
So let me say a couple things about this. First, it is absolutely true that Israel makes its own decisions about its security and about its path forward in the region. And that's true about Israel, but it's true about every other country in the region. The United States offers its advice, it offers its support, it offers its deterrence capabilities, it offers its diplomatic capabilities to our partners. But ultimately, our partners and our allies have to make their own decisions about their future. And the United States has to make its own decisions about our national interests. And I know that's what the State of Israel does and what they will continue to do. And we will continue to make our own decisions about our national interests. And the decisions that we have made that we will continue to stand by and continue to pursue is to use our diplomacy and deterrence to try and avert a regional war. We're going to continue to do that. But it's always been true that there are a number of other players in the region besides the United States. It's Israel, it's terrorist organizations, there are other countries in the region, all of whom have agency in this question. And what we will continue to do is use our diplomacy, use our deterrence to try to achieve the best outcome possible.
But don't you see that maybe their own interest in their own way of thinking, by risking or going against your interest as the United States of going toward a regional war? So
they are going to make their decisions. We are going to make decisions about our interests. But if you look at the questions that have been before us the past few days and the questions that got us to where we are today, we're here responding to an Iranian attack that we, along with Israel primarily, were able to successfully defeat, that Iran launched because Israel has taken out the leaders of a terrorist organization. And that's something we support them doing. So while there are certainly steps that Israel takes with which we do not agree, and we have been quite clear about that, we do support them taking out the leaders of a terrorist organization. We support them degrading a terrorist organization. Those are steps that the United States would take as well. Those are steps that Arab countries in the region would take. Doesn't mean we always agree with the way that they do it, but we fully recognize their right to do it, and we're going to continue to have conversations with them about the best way forward.
My last question is just, there's some statements coming from Tehran that they waited so long after Hania was assassinated in Tehran because they received messages from the United States that something will happen regarding the ceasefire in Gaza, and this maybe will give them a way of not responding to Israel, and this didn't happen. Did you give them this message?
So we made clear through a number of diplomatic channels. I'm not going to talk about our direct communications with Iran, as I never do, but we did make clear through a number of diplomatic channels that the situation in the region was very tense and that the ceasefire talks were at a very delicate nature, and Iran should not do anything to upset those talks. Now, what's happened in the meantime? Obviously, there's been a lot of water under the bridge since that date. But if you look at what's happened in the past few weeks, it has been Iran's client terrorist organization that has been the impediment to reaching a ceasefire agreement, which is not to say that there have not been times in which Israel has made reaching an agreement more difficult. They absolutely have, and we have been trying to work through those objections as well. But in the past few weeks, it's the terrorist organization that Iran supports that has refused to come to the table to talk about how to get a final agreement. So, Saeed.
Thank you. You're saying that Hamas has rejected, or Hamas is obstinate about the ceasefire talks. I just want to understand what you're saying.
Yeah, so it is. So to be clear, I went through some of this yesterday, Saeed, and I know you were out. Everybody's allowed.
Sorry about that.
And no, everybody's allowed a day off. So obviously this has been a long and winding road trying to get an agreement over the finish line. If you look at the events since the president put forward a public proposal on May 31st, and then later in August where he presented a bridging proposal to both parties that narrowed the differences down to a final few provisions that we were trying to work through. Obviously, there were things where we wanted to see Israel make tough decisions, and there were places we wanted to see Hamas make tough decisions. And we thought we had been making progress on narrowing those differences and having a proposal that would bridge the final differences between the two parties. And then in the past few weeks, Hamas just stopped engaging with the mediators, with Egypt and Qatar. So right now, which is not to say that there aren't, as I said in response to one of the other questions, not to say that Israel, if we can get back on track, doesn't have difficult decisions to make. They will have difficult decisions to make, and we will be pushing them to make those difficult decisions. But right now, and for the past few weeks, it's been Hamas being unwilling to engage in any meaningful way with the mediators that has kept us from moving towards an agreement.
I'm sorry. But a couple of things.
Can we just follow up? Has Israel engaged in a meaningful way in the last week?
We have been engaging. So
they never responded when you guys put forth that proposal for a 21-day ceasefire.
So let's keep things separate. We're talking about the ceasefire proposal in Gaza right now. They have been engaging with us on a meaningful way. I can talk about that.
Okay.
When Saeed's on, I can come back and talk about that. About the
That's what you're
we're talking about the proposal in Gaza.
Just to follow up, although Hamas did accept the proposal as was suggested by the president on May 31. They accepted it.
Just to be clear, before you go on your question,
they keep saying,
it's not accurate.
They keep saying we accept it wholly.
I know they didn't.
Okay.
I can tell you, having looked at the text, the original proposal, and looked at the text of the response, they accepted some provisions and proposed changes to others. That's not an acceptance. That is a negotiation.
Yeah, but a couple of things on this point. I mean, you mentioned that Israel has a right to go after terrorist leaders and kill them and so on. Israel has been doing this for decades. They've killed scores of Palestinian leaders, scores of Lebanese leaders, and so on over the years. Has that in any way really listened the conflict, resolved the issue, brought peace to the region, arrived at resolution of the conflict?
There is
do you believe? Do you believe that what Israel is doing now is basically makes it safer?
There has been a long history of violence in the Middle East. Decades and decades of violence. And you have heard the Secretary talk about one of the things we would like to accomplish is to break that cycle of violence and ultimately reach resolutions to establish an independent Palestinian state, which of course is the absence of which fuels much of the insecurity in the region. We would like to see Israel normalize its relationships with its neighbors. But in the meantime, that does not mean that Israel should not defend itself against terrorists that are committed on killing its civilians and destroying its state. Any country would do that.
Mm-hmm. Okay, let me ask you, just shift gears on the aid issue. ProPublica published a report saying that Israel deliberately blocked humanitarian aid to Gaza, and there were two U.S. government bodies that told that to the Secretary of State, but he basically rejected it. And in fact, he told Congress that that in fact Israel was allowing it to go on. Can you comment on that?
Yeah, I will, and I'm glad you asked me this question because I think there have been a lot of misperceptions about what happened that I do want to clear up. So it is not at all uncommon when the United States government is looking at difficult questions for different agencies inside the United States government to come to differing conclusions, or different bureaus and components inside an agency to come to differing conclusions. And that's what happened here. You had you had a number of components of the department that were making recommendations. You had other agencies inside the U.S. government outside the State Department who were providing information to the Secretary. And when the Secretary got all those recommendations, in a number of meaningful ways, that they conflicted. You had some people making one set of recommendations and other people making, if not diametrically opposed recommendations that conflicted. And so that's not an unusual thing. That happens all the time when making difficult decisions. And so what the Secretary did is what we always try to do, which is to sift through those conflicting recommendations, look at the underlying information, and make the best judgments we can. And the judgment that we ultimately made, if you read the National Security Memorandum, and I think a lot of this has been lost by people who have forgotten in the months since it was released what it said, that report was quite clear in identifying that there were a number of steps that Israel had taken or not taken that had led to the hindrance of humanitarian aid being delivered to Gaza, and that we were quite concerned about those steps. But in the meantime, they had implemented a number of additional measures that we had recommended to them to improve the delivery of humanitarian assistance. And it is looking at all those factors together, where the situation had been and where it had gone, that led the Secretary to come to the conclusion that he made. So it is far more complicated than the kind of headline or tweet version of this situation that I know often gets written up. I will say, the final thing I will say about that is, this is an ongoing situation where we constantly monitor the situation, identify deficiencies, engage with the government of Israel, engage with the UN and humanitarian partners in the region to try to correct those deficiencies, and then move forward. And our assessments, because we're not done making those assessments, will continue.
Can I follow up on that?
Yeah, Tom, go. Oh, yes.
Just a specific follow-up on that. You talked about these different parts of the State Department making different recommendations. In the ProPublica story, and I guess we know about this from the NSM, but if you were going to look to parts of the U.S. government to tell you on the specific question of whether a country is blocking the delivery of humanitarian aid, wouldn't you look to USAID and PRM in this building? Aren't they exactly the two parts of the government that you would ask that question?
So I would look to them. I would also look to our experts in the region, our experts in the bureaus that cover the region, as well as other U.S. government agencies. And that's what we did. And without speaking to the recommendation of any individual component, any individual bureau or agency, because it wouldn't be appropriate for me to do that, the Secretary got conflicting recommendations and had to resolve those.
Doesn't it suggest, and isn't the Secretary's decision based on recommendations? He's taken the expert recommendation on that specific humanitarian question and considered it looking at the political and strategic other influences and made a decision. But the actual technical advice from the two agencies involved in that specifically was that they are blocking it.
So this is not a comment about the question, but it is a comment about some of the criticism that the Secretary has received. One of the things that I have found over the years in government is when there are conflicting reports, the side that had the opinion that you agreed with was the expert side, and the other side was a bunch of political hacks. And that is always the way that people interpret these. We look at it as all of these officials who made recommendations had expertise, and the Secretary valued all of their expertise equally, and ultimately took their recommendations, but also dived into the underlying facts and dived into not just looking backwards months and months and months, but what the change in the situation and the change in the delivery of humanitarian assistance when we made that assessment, and found that to be just as important as the events that had happened in the previous months. And the report's language reflected all of that. We were quite transparent about how we had seen the situation change over time.
Wait a second. I don't understand how you can say the Secretary valued all their expertise equally when he rejected the side that...
So you can value someone's expertise and still disagree with, I value very much your reporting, Matt. I disagree with some of the stories that you write. You can value
first of all, I question that.
You can value someone's expertise and still disagree at times with their recommendations when you have conflicting information. It's just
Wait, so there was conflicting information that suggested
you had
that?
conflicting assessments from different bureaus inside the department.
Okay, but assessments were based on facts on the ground, right?
They were based on.
Right?
They were.
What was happening on the ground?
So it's not just.
पेशावर के दिल के 16 दरवाजे हैं और हर दरवाजे में छुपा है खुलूस, प्यार, जिंदा दिली और बहुत से खाने और हर खाने में बहुत सा गोश्त, नमकीन गोश्त, चर्सी टिक्का गोश्त, कढ़ाई गोश्त, तंदूर गोश्त, चेनकी गोश्त, पुलाव गोश्त, चपली कबाब। पेशावर के खाने और 7 अप, यही तो है पाकिस्तान का फूड सीन।
एक कप और डबल दानेदार, तुम में एक और कप चाय।
Crystal clear, super stylish. Novia V60 design.
पेशावर के दिल के 16 दरवाजे हैं और हर दरवाजे में छुपा है खुलूस, प्यार, जिंदा दिली और बहुत से खाने और हर खाने में बहुत सा गोश्त, नमकीन गोश्त, चर्सी टिक्का गोश्त, कढ़ाई गोश्त, तंदूर गोश्त, चेनकी गोश्त, पुलाव गोश्त, चपली कबाब।